My first autism episode was by far one of the two most requested topics to date, and it was well received by all of you in the lovely Just Dumb Enough audience. But in talking to listeners, many people still wanted more. Something even more personal. So now I'm revisiting the topic with an all-new expert and a different angle. Welcome to the Just Dumb Enough podcast, a show that acknowledges no one is always an expert by dispelling misconceptions with real experts. I'm your host as always, Colton Petrie. My guest today is Deann Hampton. Deann has been mother to two twins for 35 years now. Even though they're grown, Deann had a rocky start to say the least when they received multiple diagnoses at a young age. The road was a hard one to travel, not knowing that autism was at the heart of the issues, and Deann got a lot of advice that did more harm than good. She covers some of the different diagnoses of autism and its spectrum of disorders, as well as the rise of the neurodiverse population, and also what parents may find helpful in their day-to-day. She also references some products, none of which are sponsors of the show, and also are not things that I can recommend or advise on with any level of confidence. But that's why I have experts on the show and always recommend you leave here and research the things that interest you on your own. This is a great standalone episode, but I also recommend checking out the first time we covered it on the show with Tobi Rates. That first interview covers a lot of the basic terms and conditions that come up in today's conversation that may be unfamiliar to you if you don't already have some level of knowledge on the condition. Let's learn some tips and tricks. Welcome to the show, Deann Hampton.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, I'm so excited to have you with us. Why don't you give an introduction for the audience about who you are and what you do?
Oh my goodness. Well, where do I start? I was a mother, a vocalist in my dad's band, and a part-time accounting specialist for years and years while raising my children. They were my top priority. Beautiful twins, boy and girl, and they're now 35 years old. So I've had a lot of experience. Um, they ended up showing signs of ADHD, Tourette syndrome, and OCD at the age of 15 months. And we didn't understand what was happening. And we weren't told that it was autism. So we were kind of flying blind through our lives, raising our children. And we used our hand-me-down parenting skills that did not work with these children. You cannot discipline them or they'll discipline you right back, is what we learned. And so in the interim, when they were about 3 years old, our daughter was having some really difficult behavioral issues. And so we went to a psychologist, and that psychologist said for us to get tough with her and to ignore her because she was just attention seeking. And we only discovered years later that that was, some poor advice, and that she told us just not too long ago that she felt abandoned by those responses that we had to her. So it's really been my mission for the last 10 years since they were 25, and my son ended up sick with some comorbidities to autism. He had kidney failure, and he still does. He's on dialysis. So I've been on a 10-year trek to try to find out why and how all of this happened. And what I found is, I believe, can be very helpful to other people in autism families. And so I sat down and wrote my book. And then I dug in. I started a nonprofit that will assist families in providing early intervention to their children between the ages of 2 and 6. And I'm really excited about that because there are product services and just simple information that parents and grandparents can receive and utilize on their own, and gain confidence in knowing and understanding their child or grandchild with autism.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, this is an education show, so let's start right off the bat with, what you learned and what this journey was like.
Oh my goodness. Well, I learned number one that the nervous system itself has a memory, and the nervous system remembers things before our minds can remember. And in that journey, I also learned that the immune system is, when it's not resilient, then then the person cannot be resilient as well. And they're not resilient to environmental things, but they're also not resilient to emotional things. That's what part of the rigidity of autism spectrum disorder, as it shows, um, ends up being. I also learned that people with Asperger's syndrome, especially women, according to studies that were done in the UK, they have been misdiagnosed for years. There's actually a lost generation of women who should have received a diagnosis of Asperger's or autism, and they didn't. Instead, because of the chameleonism that's involved in those behaviors in women and girls, they were called mentally ill and treated thusly. And so it ends up being a misdiagnosis and a maltreatment for how many women we don't even know, but it was 700,000 women in the UK alone who answered the survey as possibly being more toward Asperger's than being toward, and of course they call it now level 1 autism, and officially. But then, of course, we also have the communities of millennial adults who say, no, we're not autistic, we're neurodivergent, or we're neurodiverse. So we have a lot of input from these adults that are coming in and saying, this is what it should have been, and this is how we should have been treated. But we can't go back and change it through time, but what we can do moving forward is make sure that those appropriate diagnoses are made and that the appropriate treatments are given.
Yeah, is there like a list of early signs or, things you commonly look for now that we know, significantly more, hopefully, than we used to, so that we don't misdiagnose people?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, our medical systems are kind of behind the times, and it's not really their fault. It's the training that they receive and don't receive. But the fact that the parents haven't been deferred to, as far as being the experts on their lives, their bodies, their children's lives, their children's bodies, all of that has really kind of messed things up, because what we need is to be able to be the experts of our own lives and be the experts of our own health. And in doing so, we can bring in new observations and new subjective evidence, which is just as important as objective evidence. And the primary disorders that I discovered through just my children and talking to other parents and things like that, being on groups on Facebook, they're all talking about how their child won't sleep, they won't eat except for certain foods that are not really healthy, and they have behavioral issues. They unpredictable behavioral issues. And so those are really the three primary disorders: eating disorders, sleeping disorders, and behavioral disorders. So if we can get families in a position to where they know what to do for their children to address those three primary disorders, then it won't stem further into a higher level autism diagnosis. Because what that represents is these kids, they end up becoming defensive, and they live their lives in defense mechanisms, and then it becomes survival, because to them and their just deep sensitivities, they feel like the world is hostile from the time they can remember. And so, and that's not even if their parents are abusive or anything like that, if they have abuse in their family or what have you. But there are so many parents who are just scratching their heads and saying, no, it couldn't be related to trauma or anything like that because I didn't abuse my child. And what I'm saying is from that child's perspective, simple things can feel abusive. They can feel traumatic to them. I'll give you an example. I when I was 2 years old, my parents took me to Disneyland, and I'm sitting there between my mother and my father on this planter thing, and looking up at the fireworks. And I was scared to death because I thought those fireworks, because I have such an attention to detail, I thought those fireworks were literally going to come and hit me because they were falling. And so, and none of them understood, nobody around me understood why I was so frightened or anything. So that's just one example, of how the adults in the room can see things so much differently than the tiny person that's there trying to process the world and has a disadvantage in being able to process it and being able to communicate and express feelings and because their nerves are affected, their nerves are damaged, their auditory nerves can be damaged, their ocular nerves can be damaged, and so now there are ways to address those as well. And so that's where I really hope to serve families.
And this is one of those that's hard to see if you're not looking at a full picture, if you're looking at things individually. You go to your doctor, they get to see you for what, 10 minutes. It's not exactly like they're getting big lens pictures here. And then you're at home and you're maybe a first time parent or something like that. And you're like, wow, my kid's a really picky eater. And it's like, well, there might be more to it than that. It's just, when you look at it and you're a parent, I have to imagine your kid's a picky eater. You're like, this is really frustrating. I don't know how to feed my own child. And you don't look any deeper than that because you have this very like surface level concern.
Exactly, exactly. Yes, the food issue is a big issue. It was always for us, and we never could figure out why healthier foods were avoided at all costs, and then certain foods were accepted all of the time. And a lot of that has to do with tactile difficulties, putting something in your mouth and just the way it feels. And the way I understand that as well is because my daddy used to try to make me eat cream style corn when I was little. And he finally got me to take one bite and I started gagging because it tactilely felt horrific to me. I wanted it out of my mouth. And so I think that's a lot of it because they're so sensitive. They're sensitive to the way things feel, including the food in their mouth. And then there's also the pica, which is I can't even remember what it stands for, but it's basically where children start eating sand or they start eating rocks or something. And it's I believe the answer has been found because it seems like they're trying to get minerals. Um, so their bodies lack the minerals that they need in order to, stop certain behaviors. And that's when I discovered Ion, Intelligence of Nature, liquid supplement. It's by Dr. Zach Bush. And I used it for my grandson. He's 7 now, but I used it for him 30 minutes before meals, just a really small dose, starting out with a really small dose. And I'm telling you, I watched that little guy come out of no eye contact. I watched him become more aware, more focused. I watched him be able to train, toilet train, everything. It started happening. One of the things that he had a problem with toilet training was the sound of the flush. He would cover his ears, and so I found another product which I want to offer both of these products through my nonprofit, uh, which is it's called Brain Harmony. It's through Integrated Learning Systems, and it's headphones that play frequencies that actually heal the auditory nerves. And when I used those headphones, those auditory nerves were healed as well. And so he stopped doing this. But what was also amazing was that he ended up being able to learn. He wanted to learn things again. He wanted to progress. And, he had regressed prior. And so this was all good news. So I'm just really hopeful that other families will be able to utilize these products and more and be able to see those differences in their children as well.
Yeah, and some of this is that, recovery, like you're talking about. If you've got a picky eater or they're engaging in pica and they're eating things that aren't supposed to be eaten, just finding the little solution could make a lot of difference.
Yeah.
Like we all get, tired and cranky from time to time, but if you're not sleeping, like you're not resolving the issue. And if there's an issue keeping you from going to sleep, it's the same thing, right? Like if there's something keeping you from eating because you can't engage with that much stimulus, like
Yes,
underlying
absolutely.
issues.
And that was one of the benefits with the ion as well, is that he started recognizing that he was hungry, which is also a thing, I guess, for a lot of children. He started being able to recognize when he was hungry, and he also started wanting healthier foods because that ion actually helps smooth out the gut, and it makes it able to absorb the nutrition correctly. So it's just good all around. Also, I noticed behaviors with his sleep as well. I mean, he was able to sleep better, taking the ion and getting better nutrition. That's the key.
Yeah. So are there things that parents should be on the lookout for if you're like, I don't know, he has this reaction to broccoli and you're like, it might be, a bit of an overstimulation. Is there things like that that they can look out for?
Well, basically, I mean, it's the biggies are, of course, sugar. Sugar's a big one. Food coloring is a big one. If food coloring is going to be used, like for birthday cakes or something like that, you can now buy vegetable food color, and it's beautiful. It's just as bright as the other, only it doesn't have the same. It has a better quality of ingredients. So those are the two main ones that I can think of.
Okay, interesting. So what else can you look out for? I know we've kind of talked about food. What about, you're talking about sleeping difficulties, or were there any specific things in there to look out for?
Well, they were talking about how parents were talking about how their children or grandchild would keep them up all night, and then the whole family would be, dead tired the next day. So, what I did with my own children is I gave them melatonin. I just gave them a quarter of a melatonin, a quarter of a 3 milligram, and that did well for them. But it seems like now they're more resistant to the melatonin, and that's because there's a imbalance between melatonin and serotonin in their bodies, and so that's why they get turned all around, or they might sleep during the day. And part of it too is a need for safety, a real need for safety and security at night, because a lot of these kids have night terrors or nightmares, and they can't deal with them as readily as neurotypical children can. They seem very real to them, and so then they avoid sleep because they want to avoid that terror. So taking care of those things, and giving them the security that they need, even if it means, I'm sorry, but even if it means putting a little cot next to your bed so that they have a secure place to feel your presence, so that they know they're safe, it's going to help immensely.
Yeah. And I have to assume some of that, like they don't feel safe, they don't feel secure, they're not sleeping, so then they keep everyone else up. And that kind of creates, like a feedback loop because now you're exhausted, you're tired, you're not as willing or as patient to deal with some of the difficulties that might just seem otherwise, trivial. Is you're like, oh, I'm so exhausted, I can't take the extra time to parent my best.
No, I don't think anybody can under those circumstances. I know we had a difficult time, and again, we didn't even know what we were dealing with. We were flying completely blind. So, yeah, I've often said that raising a special needs child is difficult and it's frustrating and it's lonely because you end up, pushing everybody else aside to give all of your energy to that child. But if you're trying to discipline in the traditional ways, you're going the wrong direction. You need to stop and think about what you're doing and really try to understand the child's point of view, from that point of view that says I'm small and I'm scared and I don't know what's happening around me and I want to understand what's happening around me and I need your help to do it.
Is there a way to balance that so that you are, because I feel like as a parent, and I'm not, but as a parent, you'd want to like, give so much attention to your child and try and take care of their every need. Is there a level of overparenting that also goes into this?
There he is. As a matter of fact, there was a time, I mean, it's interesting though, because back in the 50s, they were giving barbiturates to mothers and children, which was not good for anybody. I think that caused a lot of addiction and everything later on. But they called mothers refrigerator mothers back then, the ones who had unruly or behavioral difficult children. And then in the 90s, they were called helicopter moms or helicopter parents. But what wasn't understood was that there was an explosion in the early 90s of autistic children, regressing. So they ended up calling them helicopter moms because they didn't understand what was happening to all of us. We had to keep a close eye on our children. There's a link between like Alzheimer's behavior, PTSD behavior, and autism. And that's the thing that says I'm going to open up the front door and go wandering out in the street, and I have no fear because I'm not aware enough to know what's going on. And so yeah, we had to keep a close eye on our kids. And we had to protect them from bullies in school and everything like that because the kids in school didn't understand them. They were different, and they were smart, but they were different. And people didn't like them because they a lot of them actually feared smart people, especially after Ted Kaczynski did his stint, which I'm glad he's gone.
So when you're talking about, some of these social aspects as well, are there a lot of, behavioral things that you have to be aware of in raising, a child with autism?
Yes, and one of the main things is that they can learn through play, and that's what I loved about the headphones, using the headphones with my grandson because they encouraged me to do physical therapy with him, and they encouraged me to do just play with him. And so I bought some really unique activity toys that are geared toward staying active and reciprocating in play and everything like that. But the most important part of that is to allow that child to to earn or gain confidence and trust through play. And as they're playing with you, they're learning. And so if they have the headphones on too, they're learning double because they're healing as well. So I'm telling you, those frequencies, man, they really work. I would not have believed it. It seemed like magic, but they do work. And they're amazing. So yeah, the play thing is very important. I played with him. I took him to a place here called the Discovery Lab that has all kinds of scientific toys and games and things and activities for kids to do. And so anything you can do like that, it's going to help them continue to grow, continue to learn and learn to reciprocate with you, do the back and forth so that later on when you ask them a question, they won't say, I don't know. They'll say, they'll give you an answer because they're able to process that then.
And they've had a bit of time to like just socialize with you in a normal environment where they're happy and they're just doing things they enjoy and they kind of get to associate some of that feeling with you now.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the things I did with my grandson, I made sure to do was, he was wanting to get up and jump around while eating. And no kid wants to stay sitting still when their insides are just jumping, all over the place, and their nerves are going. But I was able to also use the ion for that, and we would sit down and I taught him table manners. I taught him how to talk by laughing and joking and everything else. And it was just amazing watching him start to grow again. And uh, his issues were a little bit more severe than our children's were. Our son was reading by age 2, and he knew world geography by age 4. And but then by the time he got into like junior high, he was already burned out. They were actually keeping him back. And that's one of the regrets that I do have, is I wish I had had a special school for him to go to that would you know motivate help with motivation and all of that stuff. And that's one of the things that I want to do too. I've started a nonprofit. That nonprofit can change over time. And one of the things I want to do is set up learning centers, because all of these parents are saying, my child got kicked out of daycare and I have no place to take him. Who can take care of him? Who understands him? And I'm like, I do. I wish I could take them all. I would love to teach them. So that's part of my goal.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and let's talk more about your nonprofit and the things you can do now in your current state before you have, the growth enough to handle all kinds of schooling like that.
Well, basically, we're starting out just with the nonprofit, gearing toward taking a funding, and then it's called a different kind of dispensary, and it's because we're going to dispense anything and everything we can to help families, to help children, and adults as well. I mean, they can benefit as well from these things. And so we're going to start out with the two products that I mentioned, the Ion liquid supplement, as well as the integrated learning systems brain harmony frequency headphones program. And when we do that, we're going to either be able to deeply discount the prices for people who cannot afford them. Maybe they're on Medicaid or Medicare, and just can't afford that kind of hit. So that's what we're going to do, is we're going to try to help them any way we can to get the products, learn how to use the products, learn how to work with their own children. And the love is what is going to make the difference. The love from a parent or from someone who's really close to you, it makes all of the difference as far as how responsive that child is going to be. I even use the Helen Keller as an example, because if her teacher hadn't had the patience and the compassion and the understanding that she had for her, she might not have ever been discovered as who she was on the inside. She was literally locked in because she couldn't see and she couldn't hear. So all she had was touch. And touch is so, so very important. And it has to be the right touch, because, because of the nerve damage and everything else, touch can be painful. I have fibromyalgia myself, and I have chronic fatigue syndrome. I've had a lifetime of chronic fatigue syndrome since I was 15 years old. And because of those things, I passed down those sensitivities to my children. And so I was able to feel how they have felt, overall. And when I realized that I haven't felt this way my whole life, but they have, oh my gosh. I mean, just this wave of empathy just literally poured over me, because I just thought I know I have loved my kids dearly, but I have failed them, and I didn't mean to, but I did. And so I just want other families not to have that same feeling.
Yeah, and I mean, there has to be a real problem when you've discovered like, oh, my child can communicate through touch. Like maybe that's their thing, is that they, this is how they communicate best. I have to imagine you want to engage in that. You're like, I want to use, as much of this as I can. And there has to also be a threshold to that where it's like your child's largest sensory input might be touch. But if they engage with that for way too long, like now you're overstimulated, you're just over the top. You're like, my ability to cope with, how much input's coming in is just ran out. Like, that's it. I'm
Yeah.
done.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Some of these kids are hypersensitive, some are hyposensitive, and it usually goes along with boys and girls from what I understand or from what I've been able to gather. But yeah, my son was hyposensitive. He didn't feel much of anything, and my daughter felt way too much, and I think she would feel pain even with her clothes. Her clothing had to be just right, or she would just cry and just scream until they were off. And so I have a lot of empathy for that now too, because my clothes hurt me as well. And it's trauma triggered. If you go through a trauma, or if you go through a highly stressful time or whatever, that's when the pain hits, and it lingers, and it's miserable for me, so I know it had to have been miserable for my daughter and so many others. And so yeah, we just got to be able to balance those things out, balance the sensitivities out.
Is there a good way, if there's a parent out there and you're trying to communicate with your child where they have very limited communication abilities, right, when they're very young, is there a way to kind of see if they are overstimulated by something?
You can usually probably tell just by the what where their movements are, what they're showing as far as that goes. I mean, I've had people saying, my child keeps scratching his eyes and everything, keeps rubbing them until they're red and inflamed, and I don't know what to do. I think it's stimming. And I was like, I think it's allergies. I think he's having allergies to something. And so, there are things you can do for allergies, and that's what you need to do.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, if a lot of people I think that I've heard from, parents is they're like, I cannot keep my kids dressed. Like, once I got them into clothes, we're out of the diaper phase, whatever else, they're like, these kids just want to take their clothes off constantly. And you're like, is that just a kid thing? Or how do you tell when it's, an overstimulation where they truly cannot deal with these clothes being on?
Yeah, I think it may be a little of each. I know lots of children historically have done that, they want to go without their clothes. But I think it also is a larger statement on our environments and how they affect our central nervous systems. And because that's what makes us overfeel things. We have overstimulated nervous systems, and we're very sensitive that way. Highly sensitive people are. We ended up being able to resolve a lot of that problem with my grandson just by using the headphones. They seem to help a lot with nerve repair, and he didn't have those same sensitivities anymore. He also didn't have the I don't know what you would call them, these actions, these activities that would just come out of nowhere, where he'd all of a sudden just have to jump, and his head would hit your chin if you're near him, or what have you. But a lot of that stuff became calmer as he became more aware of his body in space. And so it really was helpful and relieving for him, as well as us, as well as all the people around him. And
Yeah.
we also used when he was here, we also used essential oils, certain essential oils. Vetiver is really, really good for autism and for the comorbidities.
Sure. Are there like classes or programs that can help parents and children kind of figure out, what some of these reactions are that help them learn some of those like impulses and body awareness?
I think there may be. I know there's one place in a neighboring town that had such it had training for parents and things like that, but it seemed cost prohibitive. at the time. And then, they also have ABA therapy, which is good for smaller children, but older children, if they have ABA, a lot of times they end up really, really frustrated and angry because they're realizing that they're basically just following what somebody else tells them to do, and they're not able to explore or understand who they are within themselves. They're just supposed to be compliant. That's it. And so they get really, really frustrated and angry because they still can't express themselves. They're just doing what they're told to do, as far as being socially acceptable or what have you with their behavior. There need to be more accessible ways to be able to help these kids, and it has to be done with love. And that's one of the things that clinicians don't have for all of our children. They don't know them. So uh, that's why families, really, I hope will be encouraged to take matters into their own hands and say, this is my child and I love my child and I want the best for my child. And so this is what I'm going to do. I also want to be able to hire from within my membership for my nonprofit, and be able to maybe even pay some single parents to stay at home with their children, train with me, and then help their own children, and then they can be equipped to go out and help other families in their communities. It would be amazing.
Yeah, that would be amazing. And excuse
Yeah.
my ignorance, what is ABA?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's applied behavioral analysis, and it was created in the 70s, and I'm sure it played its part because ultimately families and parents needed their children who were out of control to be able to have some self-control. And that's basically what it does teach, but it teaches in such a way that that child still doesn't know who they are as a soul, who they are as a person.
Yeah. Well, I love the goals. I mean, I'd love to give you some time to talk more about, what you're doing and where people can find you and, some of the hopes for the future because it sounds like this is a great program that, I'd love to see up and running and lots of membership and everything else.
Yes, thank you, thank you. We're still in the forming stages, but I have set up the nonprofit through Open Collective Foundation, and it's all on my website. It's at deannhampton.com. I'm just really looking forward to having some people come on there. I have a section in there called Ask Deann, and individuals or companies, whoever, can get on there and fill out the form and ask me any question they want to, and I'll do my best to give them my best answer. And hopefully, I'll be able to go and answer some questions on a panel somewhere, or do some speaking or something like that, so that I can really get the word out about what we're trying to accomplish. And I think now is the best time to be doing it.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I look forward to seeing more from you. Thank you again for being on the show.
Oh, well, thank you very much. You're a great guy. I can tell.
I appreciate you saying that. But yeah, hopefully so much more to come and we start to see you in more places.
Yeah, that would be amazing. I'm gonna work toward manifesting that. Absolutely. Thank you so very much.
I hope this helps those of you touched by autism in some meaningful way. As always, you can reach out to me or my guests to learn more. Now past the midway point, here's our June rankings. Number 1, the United States with Texas, Oregon, and Virginia, in that order, as the top states. Number 2, Canada with Ontario firmly dominating the competition. Number 3, the United Kingdom with England still up at the top. Number 4, Egypt, holding on to that place very tightly. And number 5, Australia with a tie between New South Wales and Victoria. Anyway, that's it for this week. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you all back here for the next episode. Until the next episode, please do all those things that help the show grow, like rating, reviewing, liking, and subscribing. Reach out to dumbenoughpodcast@gmail.com or on any of the social media platforms if you want to reach out to me personally. But most importantly, stay dumb.